Hello and welcome to the Legend of Nobunaga. This week we're facing the Battle of Ishiyama. In fact, the final Battle of Ishiyama, because we've actually seen a couple of conflicts which are about Ishiyama. The first was Chapter 6, Part 1, I believe, the Battle of Noda Fukushima, which I decided was meant to represent the siege of Ishiyama Fortress, and I basically explained the whole story of Ishiyama back then. And also, in the Battle of Kisakawaguchi, we saw something related to the siege of Ishiyama, in which we attempted to break the siege by sea.
He must be defeated if we are to end the chaos. Begin your preparations!
Sir!
So now the game presents us with another stage, which isn't going to be a historical battle, because there was no final battle of Ishiyama, it just kind of fizzled out. Let's have a look at what's going on.
It is pointless. Continuing this fight is pointless. Perhaps now is the time to offer peace.
This fight is not with the sects of Osaka. It is with the Mori clan and the Shogun family behind them.
I know that, but we're going too fast. There are other things.
Kicho, is there something bothering you? You're acting strange, Kicho.
So Kicho seems to advocate some sort of diplomatic solution, which is what really happened historically, and she's also acting very suspiciously. Seems like she's got her mind on something.
Let us begin. What say our scouts?
Our scouts have reported in. They outline the following situation.
So let's see what kind of stage the game has created to represent Ishiyama.
We shall win if we defeat the enemy commander, Kenyo Honganji. The enemy main commander is positioned here.
Giving him the second name of
Ishiyama has strong
Honganji.
defenses. A frontal attack would be extremely costly.
Yeah, giving him that second name is a bit of a misnomer.
Also, our allies will join us in battle as soon as they arrive.
I'll talk about who this enemy commander really is once we get going.
The sect forces pose a formidable threat. Still, I will do my best to win.
Well, thanks, Nagahide.
Lord Nobunaga, may we know your plans for deployment?
So we had a look at the map there, and it seems to be it's like an island, a fortified island with lots of cliff tops, a big moat surrounding it. So I mean, it's kind of like a fortress. It's like they've created a natural fortress for this game stage. Which isn't to say that Ishiyama wasn't a real fortress. It was a big castle, it was a cathedral with a huge number of sort of smaller forts around it, and it also had moat systems and systems of natural defences, ditches, etc. So we see here I have reinforcements scheduled to appear at the top of the map, which is otherwise inaccessible, while my main force is at the bottom and has the option of either assaulting the enemy's island head-on across the river where the main enemy force appears to be stationed, or heading around to the east side where there seems to be other routes. And here on the west there's a little village which seems to be somehow integral. So I had that in mind when I placed down my cavalry on the left flank ready to go and see that village, and on the right flank I placed my steady infantry force. Oh, I saw this little message here about reinforcement units, and I realised that you could edit reinforcements. I'd sort of been resigned to my fate with reinforcement units, but you can actually change them. So I headed up here and decided to come up with a lineup of reinforcements that I would prefer. First I swapped them around, then I realised you could swap the generals entirely. So I decided to swap things out so that both units were cavalry units in order for them to provide quicker support once they arrived. So as I said, meanwhile on the east flank I'm positioning infantry units who'll be able to stand their ground and slowly chug their way around this pass to the east of the map, try and gain entry to the enemy's island and see what they can do from the inside. What Nobunaga and Kicho are going to do is at first just head over here and then play it by ear. Not much of a plan, but it's all I could do. I was feeling like all these passages on the island that you can see would contain ambush troops, but we'll see that actually this island's fairly deserted. We can see here that it tells me to lend an ear to peasants, and in fact there is a fun extra plan you can do in the battle
plan, my lord.
in order to get your reinforcements better access to the battle,
You all
which
know
we'll
what
see.
you have to do. Now go!
It's quite a long stage, this one, mainly because you spend a lot of time moving your forces across the
Once
battlefield.
we stop the sects, the land is ours. To battle!
It's true that the sects were pretty much the last remaining threat in central Japan, so the land probably would be his if he could defeat them. So as I say, I begin by simply moving my forces both to the left and right, avoiding the trap of hitting the frontal assault. So while I proceed to do this, I think I want to give a quick review of the Ishiyama situation, because I think it's a little bit blurry from previous episodes of Legend of Nobunaga. As I said, at the Battle of Noda Fukushima in Chapter 6 Part 1, I already talked about the 11-year siege of Ishiyama Castle and the vague events that happened. But I wanted to flesh it out a little bit since the game has made it quite a strong part of the story. It seems like it's something to know about in the legend. So I guess I'll begin by talking about Ishiyama itself. Ishiyama is a big fortress cathedral built over 100 years before the events we're seeing today. It was initially built, I believe, to house the school of Honganji, which is a sort of school of thought within Buddhism. Now, you might have noticed that Honganji is the second name of the enemy commander. This is because the enemy commander is actually the head of the school of Honganji. The reason he is, for some reason, leading an army against us is basically because Honganji school Buddhism was the root of Ikko Ikki rebellion. The Ikko Ikki rebellion itself was quite a disorganized affair. Basically, it was a group of landowners, peasants and farmers who didn't want to be ruled by the samurai, didn't want to be ruled by the clan system, and had decided to declare independence, but in a not particularly coherent way. They were just voicing their dissent and using violence to oppose the regime of the samurai. This mainly began in the Kaga and Echizen areas, which we've seen quite a few times in the game so far. They're the areas north of Owari, north of Mino, north of Omi, where Azuchi Castle is. But it very quickly spread after it began to the two cathedral fortresses of central Japan, namely Ishiyama, where we are now, and Nagashima, which was mentioned, I believe, a couple of episodes back, as something that the game just skipped over. The game doesn't treat the siege of Nagashima in any way, even though the siege of Nagashima happened in tandem with the siege of Ishiyama. Wasn't quite as long, but was very similar in that they both involved Nobunaga's forces being repeatedly defeated by the Ikko Ikki forces. The two cathedral fortresses were really targets of Nobunaga because he felt threatened by them. He felt that these religious people controlling the economy in the area was taking his power
I've been
away.
waiting for you to reach here. There's something I would very much like to tell you.
So this villager says there's a way of lowering the water in this moat.
Of my strategies.
Simultaneously, my reinforcements arrive just in time to exploit this information, which is perfect. So Nobunaga is kind of just trapped in the corner now, so I'm forced to send him all the way around to go and support my other units on the east side. Meanwhile, my reinforcements who've just come in are first going to go and look for items here on the east side where this little island is, but they don't find anything, as I recall. And then I'm going to start fighting my way west towards a set of dams, which we are going to use to try and lower the water level in the moat and open up new entrances.
Finish them.
Anyway, as I was saying, Nobunaga was indeed threatened by the economic control demonstrated by these sects, because they control basically the road system around their cathedrals, and Ishiyama in particular was very near to the capital, so having control of the roads near the capital gave them a lot of economic influence, especially when the city of Sakai was still around. They had a lot of economic influence, but in a previous episode of Legend of Nobunaga we saw that Nobunaga attacked and destroyed Sakai. or at least destroyed their industry, took it for himself. So as I mentioned in the past, in 1574, the Nagashima fortress of the Ikko Ikki was destroyed, which meant that Ishiyama became the main power base of this movement, this religious movement. I basically represented their fate, if you will. It was the materialization of this independence movement. As long as Ishiyama still stood strong, there was still a small independent nation within Japan separate from the rule of the samurai, and Nobunaga was not up for this, and he begun the siege of Ishiyama in 1570, as I've mentioned in the past, and was destined to remain sieging it for 11 years, the longest siege in Japanese history. The reason the siege lasted so long was touched upon when I talked about the Battle of Kisakawaguchi, the naval battle turned into a land battle in the game. It was because the Mori clan were resupplying the fortress during the siege, which meant the normal siege idea that they would run out of food and surrender wasn't working because they didn't run out of food. Although actually in 1575 they nearly did run out of food and they were going to surrender, and the general placed against us today, this Kenyo Honganji, was the biggest advocate of surrender of all of them. He was trying to surrender in 1575, but because the Mori clan appeared and began supplying them with additional food and ammunition, this basically led to them giving up on the idea of surrender, because there was so much external pressure for them to hold out the siege, both because they were the last real bastion of the Ikko Ikki movement, and because some of the great clans like Mori, Uesugi and Takeda were trying to persuade them to keep holding out, because they were a great distraction for Nobunaga's armies, because Nobunaga had to waste resources besieging this place for 10 years, which meant that he had fewer resources to fight with them. So these other great regional warlords were very much up for the Ikko Ikki continuing, even though particularly Uesugi was one of the Ikko Ikki's biggest enemies in their local domains. The Ikko Ikki were causing a lot of trouble for them. There were a couple of battles around Ishiyama which took place not in 1580, which is when this level in the game takes place, but I guess in 1575 there were some minor battles, and right at the beginning there was probably the biggest battle of Ishiyama. When Nobunaga first came to Ishiyama to besiege it, he planned to just assault the cathedral and take it by force, and he attempted to do so, but however the cathedral basically has this alert system whereby it would have some of its monks patrolling around the outside, and when they saw forces appearing they would ring a series of bells, and suddenly, just out of everywhere and out of the cathedral, huge armies of warrior monks would just appear and array themselves in front of the invading forces, and Nobunaga was basically severely defeated by this. I guess he underestimated them. He moved his forces up to the castle, and the warrior monks arrayed against them, and they stood off for a while, and then overnight of the first day the warrior monks sallied out and used a night attack on Nobunaga's main camp, and this basically spread so much confusion that Nobunaga's forces just retreated from the siege and lost quite a lot of troops. It was a fairly major defeat. Again, something the game wouldn't have covered. They don't like to cover his defeats, of course, but yes, I guess he was persuaded to begin the siege by his defeat at this battle, because he saw the strength of the warrior monks, and he knew he couldn't take them by force. So that was when the siege began. He decided just to starve them out.
Not bad at all.
So later on there was another battle at Ishiyama. I guess it was around the same time as the Battle of Kisakawaguchi. I think in fact I believe it was just before the Battle of Kisakawaguchi. So you could think of Kisakawaguchi as being a response to the second Battle of Ishiyama. What happened was Murashige Araki and Mitsuhide Akechi, two of Nobunaga's generals. We've all heard of Akechi, but Araki is a little more obscure. He has been shown in the game a couple of times, but I think I've only used him on one occasion. We're going to see a little bit more of Araki in the very near future, so you'll get reminded of who he is. Basically, he's one of Oda's generals. They led an attack against Ishiyama Fortress. They had around 3,000 troops, and basically just tried to take the fortress using force of arms, just like Nobunaga had done when he first arrived, and it failed in much the same way, and they suffered fairly heavy defeat. So maybe this was the nail in the coffin that confirmed that Ishiyama could not be taken. It had such strong defensive position, you would have to sacrifice huge numbers of men to make very small amount of progress into the fortress because it had so many layers. You can see here in the game, I'd reached this point on a plateau above the enemy defences, and I just thought, oh, I'm going to be really clever and use Nagahide to bombard them with arrows, but there's actually an invisible wall which stops you from doing that, which is very unfortunate, so my tactical genius was not able to come to fruition. What it did mean, however, is that all of my forces on the east side are actually completely separated from the enemies, the main part of the island. There's no way of them getting into the rest of the island, which meant I have, at this point in the battle, no way of actually getting to the enemy commander and defeating him, which meant the entire focus of the battle now came down to Masanori's raid here in the top left hand corner of the map to go and deal with this moat situation. But first, of course, he had to pick up items, as Nobunaga had just been doing, so I decided just to waste a little time while I was waiting for Masanori by healing up troops, etc., and making sure everyone was ready, hoping that once the moat level came down, a way for the rest of my army to enter the enemy's main strongholds would come available, preferably without going through the front, which I could still do. I can still lead a frontal assault where their main force is, but I was assuming that was a bad idea and that I would take a lot of losses, so I was prepared to hold out hope that some other option would appear. So now Masanori is going to move towards the floodgates and begin the plan to see what happens. So what was I saying in the story?
Now is our chance.
Mitsuhide and Murashige had failed their attack on Ishiyama Castle. I believe this was around 1575, 1576, just before the Battle of Kisakawaguchi. And now this basically meant the siege would just have to continue. And after the Battle of Kisakawaguchi, we saw that the Oa Takabune destroyed the Mori navy, which prevented Mori from resupplying them by sea anymore. But here are the floodgates. We have closed them off.
Oh, we might be able to cross.
Toshie Maida shouts across the land to tell us that we might be able to cross. I believe the same voice clip was played the last time we closed floodgates, which was in one of the battles of Kyoto. I guess they were too busy to record a different line. So this has opened up a new path on the left side of the map, connecting the bottom to the top and giving us a new way to access the island from the west side, which gives us access directly to the section of the map where the enemy commander is, which means I could actually bypass the 6 units position in front. But unfortunately it's a very long way away and I wasn't really willing to wait for all of my units to pass all the way around to get there. So I decided to split my force, use Masanori's team and Nobunaga's team to assault the newly gained entrance, and use the rest of my forces to just lead a frontal assault and see what happens. I hadn't noticed at this stage that a lot of the forces guarding the front of the fortress actually move away at this stage, making frontal assault much easier. It's actually the Miyoshi trio, I believe. We've seen the Miyoshi trio a few times before. Here they are. Yes, it is the Miyoshi trio. They're basically going to sneak around towards Masanori's position to try and seal off the gap that has appeared in their defences. And I'm going to have to deal with them. They were, I believe, the most powerful units on the battlefield. They were very effective. We'll see me fighting them very shortly. What I'm doing right here is I was trying to sneak Masanori up just to see what was going on in the central area. The enemy dispatched 2 units to deal with me, both of them rifle units, and now I'm going to have a lot of trouble because basically they can fire at me in a kind of suppressing fire way. Like, one of them can hold me in place whilst the other one fires, and there's no way for me to really defeat them in this situation. So I was feeling a little bit worried because I was taking such heavy fire, not making much progress. I do a fairly foolhardy charge forwards here and take a rifle volley for my trouble. Now I'm being fired at from 2 sides and I was not happy, so I decided to try and pull out with a plan to basically hide around this little corner. Unfortunately Takatora was still up there getting shot, so I had to pull him back manually as well.
Scatter the enemy and bring me their general's head.
So now I'm going to hide here. So my plan was to hide here until Nobunaga's unit could show up to give me support. However, now you can see the Miyoshi trio have basically pulled up in the area which I need Nobunaga to assault from. So Masanori's in trouble. He's cut off from reinforcements and is being pinned down by rifle fire. Meanwhile, I send Amalia and her team straight up the middle to assault the barricades. There are lots of rifle units behind the barricades, so we're going to basically be on the receiving end of Nobunaga's tactics from the Battle of Nagashino, where rifles fire through palisades at units attempting to break through. And I think I am going to take some fairly heavy losses from that. So where were we in the story? There isn't so much story left to tell. As I mentioned, the siege continues after the Battle of Kisakawaguchi for a couple of years, and they run out of food. And the commander of the Ikko Ikki inside the cathedral, he actually leaves. He sneaks out of the siege to go and do business elsewhere, and then his son begins to negotiate surrender terms with Nobunaga. And then, just as no negotiations begin, a letter arrives from the Emperor of Japan begging them also to surrender, which Nobunaga almost definitely forced the Emperor to write just to make sure that the diplomatic situation would go his way. And indeed, they choose to surrender, which meant Nobunaga eventually took the fortress 11 years after he began trying to take it, without any bloodshed. Although actually during the 2 years after the Battle of Kisakawaguchi, while he was still sieging them, there were lots of minor battles between Ishiyama forces and Oda forces. They kept sallying out to try and break the siege and always failing, because Nobunaga had basically built a massive circle of fortresses around Ishiyama fortress. So although he couldn't get in, they couldn't get out either. They had the same problem. So they were unable to sally out. Here we see in the level, I'm beginning my assault on the enemy's main position in the center, and I'm taking fairly heavy damage from these enemy rifle units, even though they shouldn't be very powerful in melee. They actually were.
Let's finish them.
Masashi Miyamoto is an integral part of the clan. He's, if not the best, he's one of the best officers in the Oda army in the legend. Although, of course, as I mentioned before, he would not have been born at this stage in history. He is a historical character who did exist, but he wasn't a military general. He was a foot soldier, but he was extremely famous for being the greatest samurai of all time. He was very skilled.
No regrets.
He was famous for using 2 swords rather than 1, which was very controversial, but made his fighting style very effective. In fact, there was one event in his life when he took on something like 5 people simultaneously, 5 enemies attempting to cut him down with 1 sword, whereas he stood in between them with 2, and he managed to defeat them all just because he was so skilled. Which, if you think about it, is pretty impossible, because surely all 5 of them could have swung him at once, different directions, but no, he was skilled enough to deal with that, and managed to survive and defeat them. There are many legendary tales about Musashi, but this isn't the legend of Musashi, it's the legend of Nobunaga. And here in the legend of Nobunaga, I'm taking some serious damage. Amalia Vankaya is being beaten by these enemy units, because she is a very low-level general. I was kind of just bringing her for fun, really. I was going to bring Yoki Kessen, but I decided to bring her instead, because I thought the game's probably going to force me to use her later in the game, because she's a story character. So I thought I'd train her up a little. But this doesn't seem to be the place for her to be on the front line. She's not very good. Luckily I had Musashi here to throw in some of his offensive skills to help her out. So let me talk about Kenyo Honganji. This is the enemy commander at the moment. He was more accurately known by the name Kosa, just a single name, a Buddhist name. And he was the leader, as I think I've mentioned already, as of the Hongi school of Buddhism, which was very influential in the Ikko Ikki movement. Basically, the Ikko Ikki movement was very much a version of Buddhism which resembled the Christian sects of the classical era, where it was all about sort of unity, everyone coming together to help each other, etc., that sort of thing. But they were also very militant about it, which I guess came from their fierce independence and desire to be rid of samurai rule. You can see here, I'm facing the Miyoshi trio, and Nobunaga is being absolutely gunned down by the enemy units in the back line, meaning I can't defeat the enemy units in the front line because I'm being too staggered. Luckily I have Masanori and Takatora coming in to distract the rifle units so that I can finish off the rest of them. This was the moment in the battle when, you can see on the left hand side, we have units like Nobunaga, Amalia and Masanori have taken heavy damage, and I actually thought there's a risk that I'll lose some units if they were to use some powerful troop skills on me now. So I had to be a little bit careful, because I'd try not to lose any units when I play the game, because it means you can't really use them in the next battle, which would be incredibly inconvenient, because I only have a very small pool of officers who I've bothered to train up, so if I can't use one of them, that's going to put me at a big disadvantage. Which is why it's annoying that I can't use Katsuie and Toshie at the moment, because they were some of my best officers, but they're off capturing all of the Uesugi domain as we speak. Anyway, I was talking about Kenyo Honganji, or Kosa. He was basically the abbot of Ishiyama Cathedral. He was in charge of it, and this meant he ended up being the diplomatic face of the Ikko Ikki movement after the Ikko Ikki basically moved into Ishiyama and made it their base. He was responsible for arranging the peace deals with Nobunaga's forces and with the Emperor. And he spent a lot of time communicating with some of the other clans, like Uesugi and Takeda, begging them to come and help them, but they never did, unfortunately. They were too distracted by their own problems.
Now is our chance.
I believe that once Ishiyama was finally taken by Nobunaga, Kosa, or Kenyo Honganji, was spared. It would have been characteristic of Nobunaga to kill him for basically harbouring rebels against him, but he decided not to. I don't know if you saw it here in the footage, but I just spotted an item behind me whilst I was using that skill of Nagahide, and in fact there was an item sitting right in the middle of the field that I just charged up, but I completely just didn't see it at all, so I sent Musashi back to go and quickly grab it. Anyway, yes, Nobunaga was actually strangely merciful to the rebels. I believe he didn't kill anyone who wasn't already dead when the peace deal was signed. He let the vast majority of the rebels go, including their leadership. And Kosa would go on to found another school of Honganji Buddhism, but not associated with the Ikko Ikki, so a peaceful version basically. About 10 years later, Kosa would become a friend of Hideyoshi very shortly after this time, and he would fight with Hideyoshi to help him become the ruler of the Oda clan when there was a brief war for succession after the death of Nobunaga. The death of Nobunaga, of course, historically happens just 2 years in the future. We're very close to it now, so the causes of Nobunaga's downfall have probably already been sown, and he is stepping ever closer to his demise. And we see that in the legend because Kicho is acting up. She knows that there's a plan to kill him, and she doesn't really know what to do about it. Apparently just hasn't decided to tell him about it either.
The enemy is also suffering. Remain strong!
Ishiyama Castle, the actual building, was burnt down. So even though Nobunaga spared all the inhabitants, he still burned the cathedral so that it couldn't be used as a base in the future. And the destruction of Ishiyama Castle represented a great material loss for the Ikko Ikki forces. It basically ended the Ikko Ikki rebellion, because their last stronghold had disappeared. They lost a lot of their influence over the Kyoto area. And the Ikko Ikki in the future would just be a minor nuisance, or basically a mercenary force used by Hideyoshi in particular. Hideyoshi would build a very famous castle called Osaka Castle on the site of Ishiyama Fortress. I believe a couple of years after it was burned down. I can't remember exactly when. Osaka Castle would be famous because it would be later the site of what is probably the last battle of the Sengoku Jidai era, in which Ieyasu Tokugawa defeats Hideyoshi's son and becomes the undisputed shogun of Japan, ending the war and meaning there's finally unified government. But that's all later. I think I'll probably talk about the aftermath of the Sengoku Jidai era towards the end of the series. But Ishiyama is essentially where all the action happened towards the end. So not only is it being mentioned quite a lot here in the Legend of Nobunaga, but after Nobunaga's death it continued to be a very important location. And it's still an important location today. It's the location of the city of Osaka, which is one of Japan's biggest industrial centers and economic centers. So here he is, Kenyo Honganji.
Nobunaga! Your grave is waiting to be filled!
He has the same voice actor as Yoki Kaisen. Fun fact. In fact, I noticed he has the same voice actor because some of the things he says when he uses his skills are the same as Yoki Kaisen. So basically when they made Yoki Kaisen, they copy-pasted this enemy commander and made him into another character.
Let's finish them.
But now I just have to finish them off. Shouldn't be too hard. The last thing I wanted to mention was you saw the Miyoshi trio were here earlier, and I was just thinking I wanted to add that it's probably not realistic that the Miyoshi trio would have been present here. I believe they're all dead at this point in history. The Miyoshi clan basically ended in the early 1570s. I believe, I don't remember exactly, but I think all the members of the Miyoshi trio were either in exile, dead, or just insignificant by this point in history. However, it's not completely implausible. And you could say that it represents the fact that, as well as all the Ikko Ikki being inside Ishiyama, all of their allies were in there as well. They had lots of allied forces of small regional commanders who sympathised with them, who had ended up also stuck inside Ishiyama, which was a big problem for the Ikko Ikki actually, because it meant all of their allies were inside the sieging screen. None of them were outside and able to help them get out from the outside. They were all trapped in this prison together.
Fight is won.
But yes, you could say it's representing the fact that they were allied forces who weren't part of the religious movement, but just wanted to get involved with the conflict, present at the various battles in Ishiyama.
More than just strength.
And now it's time to finish off Kenyo and go home. I have a feeling that the voice actor for Yoki and Kenyo is also the voice actor for Toshie Maeda. They sort of speak in a slightly similar way. It just sort of sounds like Toshie Maeda doing a high voice.
Let no one escape.
I don't actually know any of the voice actors in Kessen 3, with the exception of the voice actor of Nobunaga, which is Crispin Freeman, who is one of my favourite voice actors. And I believe he does a very good job in this particular game. He's in a lot of the Koei produced games, and some of them his acting is not very good.
All units retreat! Retreat!
So he orders a retreat, not that he can retreat anywhere because he's already as far back as he can go. And there you go.
Kenai is ours!
Kenai is a word used to refer to a group of 5 or so provinces around Kyoto which were very politically important. So I think that's what he means by that. So let's have a look at the score. Pretty solid, 350 points. It's another rank S, so we're going to get lots of prizes as a result. 3 Kingdoms Black, that sounds quite interesting. So we have the Dai Rai helmet. I think this is the helmet worn by one of the Miyoshi trio. Doesn't look very good. 3 Kingdoms Black, a black horse, which gives you this strange war stat increases, stamina stat decreases. Dignified armor, looks very nice. I quite like the color scheme on this. What's this? Suan Tu Gudyo, some sort of religious staff. Some Saiga rifle monks, which were the type of unit a lot of the enemy officers were using in this battle, so now they're on my side. Pretty useful. The Ikko Ikki did fight with rifles, although they didn't have very many. Mostly they fought with naginata, which was the standard weapon of a warrior monk. The naginata is like a pole arm, just a big stick with a blade on the end basically. It was a weapon used widely throughout Japan, especially by female soldiers. In fact, we see female soldiers in the game using it on some occasions. So Azuchi is looking very nice. They basically almost set it on fire with all these lanterns.
Kicho, what's wrong? Where are you? Where have you gone?
Uh-oh. Looks like Kicho has eloped, probably with Mitsuhide. Not good. And Nobunaga doesn't like it one bit. In the legend he's portrayed as being fairly loyal to his wife. I don't know how accurate that really is. I know that Kicho was his favourite wife of the fair few that he had.
Nobunaga had won control of the area around Osaka. Next, in preparation for his battle with the Mori forces of Western Japan, he planned a campaign against the remnants of the Takeda and Iga forces. Prior to the campaign, Nobunaga planned a large celebration at the capital. This was intended to show the world that the days of chaos were almost over.
Good for him.
Lord Oda! Lord Nobunaga! We're behind you, my lord!
Lord Mitsuhide! Oh, what courage! My lord!
Mitsuhide has some nice fangirls there. He is pretty hot, so
Yeah, but
you can understand it.
there are rumors that Oda will fall soon.
So many 2D fans of Oda in the background.
Does this look like someone who's going to fall soon? That's just something his lordship has been putting out.
You never know.
How ominous from those people on the street.
I thought that Lord Nobunaga would be all mine now that Lady Kicho was out of the way.
Are you that sure of his loyalty, my lord? All the reports we've received are clear. He's in contact with the enemy.
Do not worry. This is just an excellent plan by Mitsuhide to draw them out. I know the man. I trust him.
And what of Lady Kicho? Rumors have it that she has been seen with him.
How can I be so distracted by one woman?
Nobunaga puts a lot of faith in his friends,
Reports say that Murashige Araki is rebelling.
Murashige?
and it's not always a good idea. For example, Murashige, he was a bad friend. He's rebelling against us, which is pretty historical, I guess. He was kind of forced to rebel in some ways.
Let's review our strategy.
Sir?
Let's just quickly see what the current situation is.
Our battle with the sects is at an end. Nagahide will work for me from now on.
Oh, excellent. So now we get Nagahide back in our army.
My lord, here is the current situation.
Let's have a look. As I was saying, Nobunaga puts a lot of faith in his friends in the legend, and you can see it's kind of backfiring. He is trusting Mitsuhide and Kicho not to be up to no good, even though they clearly seem to be not up to no good since they're not telling him what they're doing, and they seem to be doing something suspicious. Anyway, we've got a new set of stages because it's time for Chapter 9, Eve of Unification. We're 2 years on from the events of Ishiyama, which means we are now in the year of Nobunaga's death, so we're getting very close to the end. We've got a couple of battles here against Araki, the rebel, Eiga forces, which are basically a group of independent samurai and ninja, and in Kai against the remnants of the Takeda force. And I was very enthusiastic actually about doing the Battle of Kai because I wanted to see Takeda destroyed since we've already seen so much of them in the Legend of Nobunaga. I wasn't very enthusiastic about the other two, but I believe I'm going to have to do at least one of them in order to complete the chapter. So anyway, that is a little advanced tip. Then next week is going to be the Battle of Kai. I've actually already filmed it, so I know in advance. I'm doing it out of chronological order because the suppression of Eiga took place before he invaded Kai, so I'm going to be doing them out of order slightly, assuming I go on to do Eiga, which I think I will, because I'm not very interested in Araki. I should clarify that Araki's rebellion was kind of Mitsuhide's fault. Mitsuhide basically started accusing him of being a traitor to Oda, and all these accusations kind of forced him to distance himself and try and escape these persecutions. And then this kind of just started a slippery slope, and he ended up being completely ostracized from Oda forces, and Oda forces eventually besieged him in a castle for around a year, and he ended up surrendering. He didn't die or anything, he just kind of didn't take part in any of the politics of the era anymore. He just lived his life in sort of unknown terms. We don't know what happened to him, but he ceased to be someone important anyway. But I'm not very interested in doing his stage. I hope he's not offended by that. So we're probably going to see the suppression of Eiga later. Eiga being one of the last independent provinces of Japan, which wasn't really ruled by the samurai. It was right in the middle of things as well. But basically no one cared about it because it was just a series of mountains with a very low population. So since Nobunaga doesn't have anything else on his plate, he finally decides to go to Eiga and start trying to suppress them. But I'll talk about that when the time comes. So we've finally seen the end of the Ikko Ikki. At least the pretty much the end of the Ikko Ikki anyway, and the fall of Ishiyama Castle, one of the last centers of independence in central Japan. So now Nobunaga just has to deal with his last couple of problems. Maybe the Mori clan shouldn't be too hard. Hideyoshi's still over there fighting them apparently. We haven't seen Hideyoshi in a while. I wonder what he's up to. And then peace should be his. He will become the most powerful warlord, and hopefully all the other warlords will just submit to him and the war can end. Nobunaga's dream of peace, which he appears to have in the legend at least, will be realized. But as I said, there's always going to be a spanner in the works, and it seems that Mitsuhide and Kicho are two opposite ends of this spanner, spinning right toward Nobunaga's works as we speak. So we'll have to find out what happens at the end of Chapter 9. So for now, I wish you a very good week, and I'll see you next time on The Legend of Nobunaga, where we'll be taking revenge on the pesky Takeda for all the trouble they've been causing us and our ally Ieyasu Tokugawa in the past. Let's see what they put up for their last stand. See you next time.